It's 2003 and the NBA is very boring. Everyone uses the same formation, the speed of play is slow, and it is considered by many as the worst era in basketball history. One of the coaches contributing to this was Mike D'Antoni, a boring or traditional coach just like everybody else at the time. However, Mike had a vision bigger than his competitors. In 2004, he decided to take a leap of faith and create a basketball strategy that no one had ever seen before. With this new high tempo and offensive style, he absolutely dominated the NBA and even won 2 Coach of the Year awards. But then how is it possible that he never won a championship? And in which way did his revolutionary strategy change the NBA forever? Well, to find out, we need to go to Italy, where Mike D'Antoni was making waves as not only a coach, but a player.
D'Antoni is an offensive genius, changing the way basketball is being played.
He was relentless in pushing us to play with quick decisions, shoot threes, shoot early.
Before he was changing the NBA forever, D'Antoni had a respectable career as a professional player as well. While he did play in the NBA, it was in Italy where he truly made his name. As a point guard for Olimpia Milano, he became a legend. Fans adored him, nicknaming him Arsenio Lupin for his ability to steal the ball. He led Milano to multiple titles and still holds many of the team's records, leading to his jersey to be retired. When his playing days ended, he seamlessly transitioned to coaching. In the 1990s, Mike got his first head coaching shot with Olimpia Milano, 1990 to be exact. But the team was not where he thought it would be after a couple of years. They were mediocre. D'Antoni recognized he was the problem. His coaching style wasn't clicking. He was not using his players correctly.
And it was, I had them not playing the right way. It's got to be me.
He had an NBA caliber point guard, an NBA drafted center. Both were doing nothing to impact the team. These players were great. He knew they were great. How could they not perform? The coach's job is to mold the team, so he made a bold move, just like he would years later in Phoenix, except this time he benched his top scorer, and I'd like you to imagine what would happen in the NBA and EuroLeague now if a team actually benched the top scorer. As bad as you think it would be, for Milano, the team caught fire, rattling off 23 wins and 1 loss on the way to a Euro Cup. This was a key moment for D'Antoni. He learned that he had to stop being so traditional, to stop being boring like everybody else.
As a coach, probably it started because I was more traditional. I was like everybody else.
He had to adapt his system to the strengths of his players, whatever that might be. He focused on up-tempo basketball, lots of quick shots, lots of movement, playing at a very high pace, and allowing his point guard to run the show. It was like a sneak preview of his future success 10 years later. Throughout the 1990s, D'Antoni kept honing this craft in the Italian league. He led another team, the Benetton Treviso, to titles and deep playoff runs. Organizations started to take notice, even back in the NBA. And this would land him assistant and scouting jobs with the Denver Nuggets and Portland Trail Blazers. And after one final return to Benetton, D'Antoni would get the attention of the Phoenix Suns. Now, what exactly did D'Antoni do in Phoenix that shocked the basketball world? How did he turn the Suns into an offensive juggernaut? And which players were key to pulling off his strategy? Okay, well, you might know the answer to the last one. D'Antoni's arrival in Phoenix marked the dawn of the new era. The catalyst, the signing of future Hall of Famer Steve Nash in 2004. It was a move that raised eyebrows around the league. How could the Dallas Mavericks just let him go? Nash was 30 years old and had been battling injuries, but his talent was undoubtable. Pundits questioned if he could be the centerpiece, though, of a winning team. However, a great coach always sees something that others don't. D'Antoni envisioned Nash as the engine of a turbocharged offense unlike anything the NBA had seen. And he was right. With Nash at the controls, D'Antoni's system would become a reality. His European offense would finally reach the peak execution he had long dreamed about. It was time to dominate the NBA with his new 7 seconds or less offense.
Mike D'Antoni created this 7 seconds or less offense to where we get the ball in, and let's go.
And it starts with Mike D'Antoni being an offensive mind that wasn't going to play 2 traditional bigs.
The core principle was simple yet radical. Get a shot up in 7 seconds or less.
For Mike, 1 of 6 tonight, 11 of his last 39. Nash a triple.
Shoot in transition.
Knocked away. Nash beating Marion.
Shoot off the pick and roll. where Nash's ability as a dribbler as well as a shooter allowed his team to do basically anything. His big man would come up and set a pick or a screen, and then he would basically make a decision. If the defense overreacts, then I can go straight to the basket and score. If they focus too much on me, well then Stoudemire or anyone who's on his team basically could then roll to the basket for a free dunk. And the final principle is to shoot before the defense sets up. The goal was to create a frenetic pace that would run opponents ragged, to open up the lane for fast breaks and kick out threes. Something that is very normal now, but it was very different back then, and LeBron James has said as much.
Mike D'Antoni was on to something. He knew before this shit even got cracking like it is now.
But to make this offense work, D'Antoni needed the right personnel. He had to be able to take it to the rest of the league. He had Nash, one of the best passers and shot makers ever. Then he unleashed Amar'e Stoudemire, a high-flying finisher made for pick-and-roll devastation who had hands like the gloves of giants. Shawn Marion was a do-it-all forward, racing end-to-end. And Joe Johnson and Quentin Richardson, they bombed away from three. D'Antoni forced his players to rethink their roles. Spacing was fundamental. Centers became mid-range shooters, wings ran to the corners, not the block. Everybody had to be ready to shoot, cut, or make the extra pass. It was a selfless, equal opportunity approach that empowered players to make split-second reads. He trusted them to make the right play. For a league that had become quite slow and boring with two immobile big men surrounded by more nimble players, the impact of D'Antoni's system was felt almost immediately. In the 2003-2004 NBA season, teams averaged 93.4 points per game. The following year, his first full season as head coach of the Suns, that number jumped to 97.2. Now, a large reason for that is the huge defensive changes that the NBA included in 2004, which were designed to promote a more open style of play and encourage higher scoring games. And while everyone scored a little bit more, D'Antoni's system was absolutely on another level. The Phoenix Suns would average 5 more points per game as the league leaders than in the previous season, and would also outscore the second most potent offense in his first year with the Suns, the Sacramento Kings, by 7 points. D'Antoni's philosophy was simple: as long as you score more points than the other team, whether it's 90 to 80 or 110 to 100, it doesn't matter. A win is a win.
And it's like, well, do we want to lose 80 to 70 or 110 to 100? What's the difference?
The results, simply, they were astonishing. In 2004-2005, this season, Nash's first in Phoenix, the Suns scored 110 points per game, and they made 130 more total threes than the second-placed three-point shooting team. They won 62 games, 33 wins more than the previous year. Nash seized his first MVP, while D'Antoni, he received his first Coach of the Year award. The foundation was laid for a 4-year stretch in which the Suns led the league in scoring every season. The 7 seconds or less Suns never made the finals, but their influence was undeniable. A three-point shooting volume that wouldn't be the average in the league for another 10 years. While Stephen Curry has undeniably influenced the league in exponential three-point shooting attempt increase, the spacing, the small ball, and the more fluid offenses were a foundation laid during this very season. Other teams, other front offices, other GMs, other coaches, everyone took notice, and D'Antoni's staff on the bench as coaches and also executives above him would change teams and bring those concepts with them. Talk about a few of those in a second. Now, obviously, rule changes that eliminated hand checking and sped up the game played right into D'Antoni's philosophy, but that's the thing, when you want to innovate, it has to go against the tide, and if the tide starts flowing in your direction, you have that unparalleled, unfair advantage. Suddenly, though, the NBA, as the years went on, looked a lot like the Suns. Fast-paced, perimeter-orientated, pick-and-roll heavy, it was a sea of change from the bruising, slow-it-down style that had dominated for years. However, during D'Antoni's bold vision coming to life with Nash's magical playmaking, greatness could not be stopped in the form of Tim Duncan's Spurs, the super team from Boston, or the Kobe Bryant-led Lakers with Phil Jackson's triangle. Their defenses were able to muster enough to force Phoenix into difficult situations when the game slowed down, such as the cost of change and pushing the boundaries. But how successful was it from a coaching point of view if they could not move beyond the Western Conference Finals? Why did the defense hold them back when the offense was so good? For all the success and excitement D'Antoni's system brought to us, the viewers, as well as the players, it wasn't without its challenges. Implementing such a radically different style of play required buy-in from the players and the front office alike. There had to be a willingness to buck conventional wisdom and not everybody was on board. Many coaches and analysts were skeptical of D'Antoni's approach. They questioned whether a team could win playing at such a breakneck pace, with such an emphasis on offense over defense. Greg Popovich, one of the GOATs of all time, once quipped, "I can get any team to score 120 points. The question is, can you hold the other team under 100? And considering Popovich has 5 championships with the Spurs and has led 5 incredible defenses to those wins, they could do exactly that. D'Antoni also faced resistance with his own locker room at times. Some players struggled to adapt to the constant running and quick decision-making his system demanded. In Phoenix, he clashed with Shawn Marion over his role and minutes. In New York, where he brought his system afterwards, he famously feuded with Carmelo Anthony, who bristled at playing power forward in D'Antoni's small ball lineups. But he persevered, confident in his vision, and he had the results to back it up, directly and indirectly. Remember, as a coach, your entire job here is to get buy-in from teams, from players, to make them understand their value and what they can contribute as a whole unit. And one pivotal moment came in the 2006-2007 playoffs, when the Suns faced off against the mighty Spurs in the Western Conference semifinals. The contrast in styles were stark, we could all see this, the run-and-gun Suns against the methodical, defensive-minded Spurs with Tim Duncan as an anchor. Due to the weak nature of the playoffs, it was considered the real finals, and boy, did it deliver. D'Antoni showed the right adjustments in some of the games to get Stoudemire free instead of having to guard Tim Duncan. Yes, the Spurs were up 2-1, but the Phoenix Suns equalized the series at 2-2. Coaching adjustments, his 7 seconds or less offense, the right personnel doing the right jobs, they were poised to take it against a more, let's just say, traditional style team that had won a title in 2003 and 2005. Due to, let's just call it a kerfuffle at the end of Game 4, Robert Horry of the Spurs, as well as Amari Stoudemire, as well as Boris Diaw, were unavailable to play through suspension in Game 5. D'Antoni was extremely unhappy about this and obviously compromised what would have been an all-time classic series, and who knows what would have happened if they were able to play at full strength for the full series. Despite this, the Phoenix Suns were up by as many as 16 points in this game. Unfortunately, it proved a little bit too much as the lack of depth and obviously their core game plan allowed the Spurs to come back and win in the final minute by a great 3-pointer by Bruce Bowen. And the Spurs would go on and dominate LeBron James's Cavaliers in the finals for their 3rd title in 5 seasons. That was a bit of a painful one to watch live, both to watch the Cavaliers, but also it wasn't, the most exciting, let's be honest. Which is a really good teaser for something coming up a bit later about D'Antoni's Rockets. But regardless, his style could compete at the highest levels. The margin for error was low and required the right players to execute consistently. As teams began to adopt elements of his philosophy, the NBA evolved. D'Antoni's influence reached its apex with the rise of the Warriors in the mid-2010s. Led by Steph Curry and coach Steve Kerr, Golden State took D'Antoni's principles to new heights. While they applied a defense to it, but they also won 3 titles within 4 years and a relentless attack predicated on small ball, pace, space, and 3-point shooting. In a way, it was the ultimate validation of D'Antoni's vision. The problem was, as I just said, they could not play defense, which led to the other great teams of the 2000s taking the rings. However, this was a case and a combination of personnel, defensive systems, and yes, execution. For example, Steve Kerr, the GM of those later Suns teams, said as much. What happened is you see teams playing a stretch 4, adapting to the rules, coaches have changed their thinking, so you're getting more and more pace and open court. And the guys afterwards like Mike, Eric Spoelstra, Greg Popovich, they have taken a lot of those elements and applied them to their own personnel. I think the game has evolved. I think Mike deserves a ton of credit for the watchability of the NBA. I think it's way more fun to watch than it was 15 years ago, and Mike, he's the guy who triggered the changes. Obviously, the execution was the major aspect of the Golden State offense, as well as its influence from other systems, but the spacing really allowed Curry to flourish. D'Antoni said, "I like it because all the guys I was associated with are there. That makes it fun, and it validates a little bit of what we did in Phoenix. It makes you feel good." Not only was it Steve Kerr though, but the 2015 to 2018 finals were played against the LeBron James-led Cleveland Cavaliers, who had their GM David Griffin work for those Phoenix teams as well. "I don't think the style itself could never win," Griffin said. "There were a statement that you couldn't win playing that way at the cost of defense. What we wanted to do in Phoenix was to run your legs out from under you, and that was going to be the way we got key stops. It certainly worked, we had great success, but we weren't able to really pair a defensive scheme and a tempo. It just wasn't something that was emphasized at the time. It gets even better for D'Antoni's feedback. Raja Bell, a player under him who worked for Cleveland's front office during these final runs, mentioned that a team like Golden State, they're number one in the league defensively, with an explosive offense like that. That's why they won so many games. That's what we were lacking in Phoenix. Both teams excelled defensively while treating offense as more than just a necessity. Their dynamic and enthusiastic offenses exemplify the peak of D'Antoni's system. Mike's offensive fingerprints are all over the league. This is not where the journey ends though. The dominance proved the system worked. But Mike D'Antoni was still in the league, and if he wanted to win the finals, the evolution of the NBA presented a new challenge to the legendary coach. How could he evolve his system to keep up with the juggernauts? Enter James Harden and the Houston Rockets. When D'Antoni took over the Rockets as head coach in 2016, he inherited a team built around Harden, a brilliant isolation scorer. Rather than force Harden into his system, D'Antoni once more adapted, crafting an offense that maximized Harden's strengths. The result was a souped-up version of 7 seconds or less, tons of pick and roll, tons of threes, but with Harden as the primary creator, a point guard, rather than a shooting guard. Unlike the past first point guard Steve Nash, he would still look to score. And while I made mention to unattractive things to watch, it wasn't always pretty. The Rockets' reliance on isolation and free throws drew criticism, but it was undeniably effective. Houston led the league in wins in 2018 and came within a game of dethroning the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals, barring a historically tragic shooting night missing 27 threes in a row. Once again, D'Antoni had revolutionized the game, this time by tweaking his own system to maximize a player who put up unprecedented numbers. The threat of James Harden forced the defense to play in a way that meant the isolation plays had an obscenely high success rate. So in his words,
It wasn't pretty. People can complain, but when you have the most efficient offense in NBA history or close to it, then why wouldn't you do it?
this approach shows the flexibility in the system that was governed by one single principle: the right play wins, whatever form that takes. This would result in D'Antoni receiving a second Coach of the Year award and brings to mind something that is more than X's and O's. He had to create buy-in for his 7 seconds or less offense. So how did he resonate with his players? How did he achieve their total commitment? For all of his revolutionary impact on the game of basketball, there's one glaring omission on his resume: an NBA championship. His teams came close, those 7 seconds or less Suns were perennial contenders, and his Rockets pushed the mighty Warriors to the brink. But he never quite got over that hump. And yet, when we talk about the coaches who have shaped the modern NBA, D'Antoni's name belongs right at the top of that list. But when you break down the NBA and you change the future of basketball with your strategies, with your ideas, you understand maximizing your players. It gives you the most wins, it gives you a great locker room. That's because D'Antoni's impact went beyond. He was a player's coach, a leader who empowered his team to play with freedom and confidence. He built deep bonds with his stars, from Nash to Harden, understanding how to bring out their best. And even though the Kevin Durant, Harden, and Kyrie Nets were a bit of a disappointment, Harden was motivated to go there not only for the possibilities, but because there was D'Antoni on the staff. He created in his teams a culture of trust, where players were encouraged to take risks and make plays. He gave them the green light to shoot, to create, to express themselves on the court. That trust was rewarded with loyalty and maximum effort. His leadership style was one of collaboration, not dictation. How can we all work together to make the best team possible? He listened to his players, valued their inputs, their ideas. He adapted his system to fit their strengths rather than forcing them into rigid roles. That flexibility and openness earned him immense respect in the locker rooms. His legacy isn't about the championships he didn't win. It's about the way he innovated, the way he pushed the boundaries of what's possible, and what he meant to his players. He saw the game differently, and he had the courage to build a system around that vision. And in doing so, he laid the groundwork for the modern NBA. No longer boring, no longer traditional. Much like the legend of Phil Jackson, who used his secret tactic to win 11 championships in 20 years. Click to learn about greatness.